I'm here today to get justice for my brother as he pleaded for his life and the officers ignored him.
Philonise Floyd, one day after burying his brother George, brought his searing personal story to the House Judiciary Committee, examining police accountability.
Yesterday we laid him to rest. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do. I'm the big brother now.
Floyd reminded the politicians that his brother was defenseless on May 25th.
George wasn't hurting anyone that day. He didn't deserve to die over $20. I'm asking you, is that what a black man is worth? $20?
The violent protests after Floyd's death have ignited a fierce examination of policing and use of force. Minneapolis's Nights of Violence forced that police department to start reforms now and to name the injustice.
Race is inextricably a part of the American policing system.
But how? Today, the politics. Republican representatives and their witnesses calling Democrats radical for even considering a cry to defund police.
One of the most unwise, irresponsible proposals by American politicians in our nation's history.
One thing in agreement, George Floyd's impact has presented an opportunity if America wants to grab it.
You have the power to make this moment in history the tipping point. So many of us have been waiting for, fighting for, and praying for.
Put your fist in the sky!
Floyd and his attorney went straight to Black Lives Matter Plaza in D.C., imploring that the momentum carries on. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Washington.
Good evening, everybody. Great to have all of you back to our Village in Action web series. I'm your host, Dr. Jason Otley, and super excited about tonight because as I was talking to our guests kind of in the green room, as we call it, a few minutes ago, what we're providing and what we have been providing these last couple of weeks is an opportunity for our family, the Village, to learn about some of this information from our esteemed guests, our experts, those who have been in the field for many years, whether that be law enforcement, whether that be policy, professors, corporate folks, investors, entrepreneurs, you name it. And one of the beautiful components of all of that is we're able to bring this to you for free. From many of our guests who come on, whether you be paying a consultation cost or whether you would have to enroll in a class and pay tuition, I'm so grateful of having a great relationship with all of these guests to provide all of us with this great knowledge without having to pay for it. They've already paid for it in their professions and paid for it in the work that they do day in and day out. So just super excited about just that opportunity. We'll show you at the end of today's call what to expect on Thursday. We already have the guests lined up for Thursday evening. So there's a lot of things that we're getting better at. Some of you have been with us since week one when we went for 5 straight days, 5 straight nights. It was just incredible. And so with many of you asking for more opportunities to engage in conversation and hear from some of these experts, this is exactly what we're doing. We're bringing it to you every Tuesday and every Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I want to introduce our guest, Dr. Nolan, Dr. James Nolan, who is a professor and chair at West Virginia University, which is near and dear to my heart. Those on the call who do know me know I received my undergraduate degree in English from West Virginia University. I ended up choosing that over Morehouse. Go figure. I had a great opportunity to save a lot of money in my first year going to West Virginia University and thought I'd transfer to Morehouse College after my first year was complete. I had too much fun and had made too many great contacts and friendships at WVU to even leave. Hence, I returned a second time for my PhD in 2013. So I am a double alum. So I know there's a lot of people on the call tonight, I think, who are still at WVU, working at WVU, or who have attended WVU. Great to have you on the call tonight. Dr. Nolan, if you could just share with us just for a few minutes a little bit about you and your background. I do know that you're a former police officer and now a professor at WVU. And so if you could just share just a few moments about the work that you've been doing these last couple of years would be helpful.
Okay, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, can hear you.
Okay, I had a little trouble unmuting. Well, I've been at WVU now for a little over 20 years. Before that, I had a career as a police officer. I had 13 years as a police officer in Wilmington, Delaware, where I worked in patrol division. I was a supervisor, I was a sergeant and a lieutenant. I worked in the drug organized crime and vice unit for 7 years of the 13. And so I had a real police experience, and I was a warrior, like many police officers are. I believed in that the job was to make arrests, and this is what the police were supposed to do. But while I was a police officer, I finished a master's and PhD at Temple, University of Philadelphia. And it was there I began thinking about context and how context matters. And so it really shaped the way I thought about policing, and I've really spent the rest of my time as a researcher trying to chase down some of those ideas. And that's what I want to share with you tonight, some of the ideas about policing. What you're going to hear from me tonight is what I teach in my class. I teach a senior level course in policing, and I have a graduate course in policing. So I'm not shortcutting anything. I'm going to tell you what I know about policing. I'm going to tell people what I know, because it's going to take a mandate from the people to teach policing. The police are not going to do it by themselves.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dr. Nolan. A front row seat in your classroom tonight, and I'm just a little upset I didn't get a chance to take you when I was there. But get a chance to ask you some of the questions I probably would have asked you had I had that opportunity. Dr. Nolan, you recently came out with an op-ed article. Actually, my good friend and fraternity brother Rob Dixon sent this to me Saturday morning about a week ago. And not only did he send it to me, he called me about 8 a.m. to say, hey, did you read the article? And so when I jumped up and had a chance to pull it up, you know, your article was titled, Law Enforcement Violence in Black Communities Will Continue Despite Criminal Justice System Action in Minneapolis Case. I'll read that again. Law enforcement violence in Black communities will continue despite criminal justice system action in Minneapolis case. That was such a bold statement, Dr. Nolan. I need for you to kind of tell us a little bit more, and then I want to read one of the quotes from the article.
Okay. Well, I mean, honestly, when I saw it, you know, it's like, once again, when I saw the initial videos, I had to sneak up on it. It was too hard to watch. But I also recognize that this is normal violence. This is the only thing that was different about this case was that George Floyd died. The picture of officers with someone on the ground handcuffed behind their back is normal violence for policing. This happens every day in every police department around the country. And so we have been through this many times before. And it's the same sort of thing that happens. We talk about, is there a bad cop, the bad apple cop, we got to catch him. But it's not the bad apple cop that's responsible. It's the nature of policing in general. And I'll talk to you more about that in a minute, but that's what I thought when I saw it. Here we go again. It's not going to stop if you punish these officers. If whatever you do, it's not going to stop it. Yeah, because they're geared up for war against the bad guys. They think they're doing the right thing, but unfortunately they're not.
In your article, Dr. Nolan, I want to point out just the first quote, and I'll read towards the end. It is logical violence within the police bureaucracy. It is organized, scripted, protected, sanctioned, rewarded, and it appears necessary in the same way violence in war appears necessary. The only way to stop it is in the war. What are you referring to? What only way to stop what?
The violence, to stop the violence. When you're at war, you're not worrying about peace. You're worrying about the battle. The officers are not trying to create peace. They're trying to win the battle. And because mentally they're at war, it's good guys and bad guys and heroes and villains, and that's the nature of the game. And so this is how in the field of policing, officers are rewarded because they're no-nonsense law enforcers. They have a tendency, they know how to find bad guys, criminals, and lock them up. And so, you know, I don't want to necessarily overstate this too much, but I'll get into it more about why the problem exists in the first place. But for now, clearly, when I saw this, I saw this is bureaucratic violence. This isn't a rogue bad guy who committed this act. This is systemic violence.
So talk about for a second how you were indoctrinated as a police officer. Did you go through an indoctrination or rites of passage where you knew that you were at war as a police officer?
Well, it's framed in a way that the responsibility for crime in communities is criminals. So no one ever challenges the notion why you know, what is it about a person that you would call someone a criminal? There's no criminal gene. Do criminals actually exist? Or is it the conditions of the place that create criminal behavior? So if you're looking for criminals, they're going to pop up everywhere. They're like ghosts. Oh, there's one. There's another one. Let's go get them. So nobody ever challenges that notion. So I was indoctrinated that way. I was socialized into the field of policing. It was as law enforcement is the game. This is the football field.
Yeah, hold on. Go back really quick, Ivan. I want to go back to the quote, the second quote. I do want to just understand a little bit more about this indoctrination. In this quote, Dr. Nolan, you mentioned they are looking for people to arrest. And so what happened to this ideal that, you know, that we see on the sides of police cars that say to protect and serve? Are you not indoctrinated in the notion to protect and serve instead of looking for people to arrest?
Well, protect and serve means protect against bad guys, protect against criminals, protect against violators. And again, it's not the evil officer. I'm not blaming the police officers individually. What I'm saying is, whether you're a black officer or a white officer, the field of policing has you going into neighborhoods as law enforcers. You get status in the organization by enforcing the law. You make lockups. They will say there's no quota, and then maybe there isn't a quota, but what you do is you go out and you arrest people, and then you charge them, and you maybe turn them into informants, and you make more arrests, because that's the nature of the job. That's the game that they're playing. And so in other words, it doesn't matter whether communities are safer because they're committed to acting as law enforcers, not as people who are making communities safer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we're not talking yet about the good and the bad cops, and we're not looking at, you know, the racial identity of cops yet, but this notion of the police bureaucracy is set up to do this game. And Ivan, show the graphic with the field, the football field. Dr. Nolan, you brought this to our attention earlier in the green room. Talk a little bit about what this means.
You notice this is Mountaineer Field, right?
Yeah, home to me.
This is the home field. So basically the way we look at these things is this, that if you want to understand behavior, you have to understand the field, because the field creates the logic. If on the field there are players, they line up a certain way, there's ways to act in correct ways, there's ways to get status on the field. Just like a football player, you score a touchdown, everyone knows what to do when they get on the field. So the rationality of police is like this. It's only rational because the field produces the logic. The field of law enforcement is you make arrests, you get status by making arrests. And so broken windows, war on drugs, all that, the ideology, we've got to catch the bad guys because they're the ones using drugs. We got to fix broken windows so the people drinking alcohol, parked the wrong way on the street, played music too loud, loitering, smoking something. These are, if we can arrest those types of people, then we can fix the problems. We'll prevent other things. But what's happened is mentally it's created this situation where officers are going into the field, making arrests, lots of arrests. In fact, in my old department, I ran some numbers a couple of years ago, and the number one charge that people were arrested for in Wilmington, Delaware was resisting.
Oh, you were breaking up. What was the number one charge, Dr. Nolan?
Resisting arrest.
Okay.
The second was something like loitering and alcohol violation. And then if you look at the felony arrest, it's like burglary arrest rates like 10%. They were clearing 10% or 11% of the burglaries. And so these things are not, clearance rates are not really that important to the police because the game is just making an arrest. It doesn't even matter whether there's conviction in court because the police, all they need to do is bring in bodies, book people, and then they go back onto the street and they're looking for more people. Now this is, in some ways I'm over-exaggerating a little bit because they're answering for service, doing emergency responses, and that sort of a thing.
Yeah.
But the notion of how they get status in the organization, they've got to do those things, but how they get status in the organization is by making arrests.
I was going to ask you that next question. This whole idea of status and reward, we have the Mountaineer Field pulled up here. Is it like scoring a touchdown? I mean, is it like,
Yes, yeah.
is it like going undefeated? Is it like going to play in the Big 12 championship? I mean, is that the status that a lot of these police officers are thinking about?
Yeah, it's if you have an interest in being a good officer, you look at what people get the ribbons for and the commendations and the day off. They get it for heroics. They get it for in-progress crimes. They get it for making good arrests. They rarely does anyone get a ribbon for really making a place safe. I mean, I've been in around policing for 40 years, and I go into the same neighborhoods that we were doing aggressive law enforcement. And those places are still dangerous. Nothing's really fixed by this at all. There's no fixing. It's like this, Jason. If a carpenter said, my job is to be a nail hammerer, and he said, hey, look, I hammered 1,000 nails today. I want you to pay me. You would say, wait a second, you didn't do anything. And the police is like that too. I'm a law enforcer. I made 1,000 lockups. Now I want recognition for this. But you didn't make anything safer. The game that they're playing doesn't require them to build anything, but they can't stop doing it because
there's so many rewards.
It's the reward structure and it's the way the game is played. But it's possible. This is the important thing to know. It's hard to change because there's a mindset that this is the way it's supposed to be.
So before we get into the video, I want Ivan to show on police reform. Dr. Nolan, talk for a minute on the reward system for a second, the reward structure. Why is it that police officers are spending so much time arresting people of color, particularly Black Americans in predominantly Black cities, when the same types of egregious crimes and the same types of missteps happen all over the nation? Why is it there's so much a target on the Black community?
Well, these are, again, this is sort of things are structured. I mean, I do a course in one of the federal prisons here in West Virginia, where a lot of people come from DC and Baltimore and Philadelphia. And if you go to this place, this massive, it's full of Black and brown faces. And when you talk to them, a lot of them were involved in the drug trade. And so a lot of them are caught up in the war on drugs, and they've been in for a long time. If you look at self-reports, black and white, Black and brown and white, they use drugs around the same rate. But it's different in different ways. In the Black community, when the reward structure is make arrests and there's open air drug dealing on corners, people selling, it's easy to go in, it's easy to ride up in a police car, slam on your brakes, and chase whoever runs. This is a strategy. Or to send someone down on the corner to call and say, hey, the guy one with the red hat has thugs. And you run down and you catch that person. And then you catch that person and he has a car next to him. And you get him for maintaining a vehicle for drugs, conspiracy because they're with somebody, trafficking, possession with intent to deliver, maintaining drug paraphernalia. So you got like 5 felonies, and then what you can do is you can wheel and deal, so you don't have to go to trial. So you say, well, you do one more person or 2 people, and I'll let you 1 felony. And so what you've actually done is you're getting people to tell on their family and their friends. And so you actually, what you're doing is you're breaking apart the trust that actually has a chance of keeping places safe. People are fighting for their own survival. They want to. These drug laws are putting people in jail for long periods of time. I have to do 1 person or 2 people, and I can get 1 felony. That wheeling dealing. That's how it's worked.
Yeah, police deals, plea bargains. I mean, you see it all. You see it all the time.
Right.
Ivan, do me a favor, and I want to kind of slide into police reform just for a minute. If you would just go ahead and show the video. Dr. Nolan, where do you stand on the debate between those who want to reform the police? We've talked a little bit about that in the very beginning of this conversation. And then activists who are calling for defunding the police. Let me unmute your mic, Dr. Nolan.
Sure.
Did you hear the question, Dr. Nolan? Oops.
Okay.
Did you hear the question, Dr. Nolan?
Yeah, about defunding.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I look at defunding this way. One is defunding and abolition and those types of things are destabilizing. And there's the way we think about policing, and if you want to talk about police reform, it's really mild changes that people are willing to do. When I talk about reform, I'm talking about radical reform, and probably people who are thinking about defunding are thinking about the same things that I'm thinking about. In my classes, I have people reading The End of Policing by Alex Vitale. And this is a book that sort of informed the defund movement. So I agree in some regard with it. But based on my research, I can also show you that no matter if they defund the police and have somebody else do it, or if the police reform and do it, they still have to know what the right thing is to do. They still have to know what it means to create a safe place. So that's what I'm here to. One of the things I'm here to do is to show you what actually makes a place safe. One of the things, because this slide is up, I want to say something about this. This is about the disposition, and what the picture is supposed to be is. The triangle represents the field that you saw, the football field. The rules of the game, the law enforcement approach, the logic of being a good officer, how you score points. And the picture on the right is the person, the man who's internalized this field. And what happens is in policing is people who are in the police department who, when you talk about reform, they think about this is the natural way that policing should be. So it's very difficult to get them to think about reform. If you wanted to change that triangle into a circle, it would be very difficult for the person with the triangle to do that, because they see things, this is the natural way policing should be. This is a disposition that makes people suspicious. when I was a cop, I used to ride down the street and I'd see somebody looking over the shoulder like this. And I said, oh, there's up in the...
Mm-hmm.
And so you're always you're looking for cues to find somebody to arrest, to find somebody doing something wrong. And you're not there in a place to help fix things. You're there to help catch things.
Mm-hmm. Well, so would you say, Dr. Nolan, that the majority of the cops that you've known or that you've worked with have been good cops, and they have been the disposition has been this game that we're playing, and now that they carry this in their head every time that they're out in the streets?
Yeah, I mean, this is why I have a hard time communicating it. I went back to my old department in 2013 and 14 and was trying to show them some of the things I learned about keeping places safe. And the officers were polite, but they didn't really want too much to do with it. I mean, I had a group of people that liked the ideas and they were willing to listen. But again, when the organization is structured to do something, like at the time they took people out of the communities and put them into something called Operation Disrupt. They were supposed to disrupt violence by going into communities and jumping out of cars and arresting people. I mean, it's even hard probably for your viewers to listen to this and say, really? That's the plan? And quite honestly, that is the plan. And within the field itself of policing, this is the way they think about it. We're needed. We're here. We're the thin blue line between order and chaos. Out there is chaos. We can protect you. And we do that by catching criminals. Mm-hmm. And everybody is either a criminal or a potential criminal.
Well, not everybody, right? Because it just seems as if in the media shows that, you know, the black and brown persuasions seem to be the ones who are looked over and scrutinized the most. Right.
Well, there was a situation in the community in Wilmington a few years back where a young African American man who was in a wheelchair, was handicapped in a wheelchair. Apparently, he shot himself. I don't know the full details, but he was suspected of shooting a gun, but he was depressed and had been threatening suicide. And the officers rolled up, saw him as a threat, was afraid that he was going to launch a bullet and hit somebody. And so they unloaded him, blasted him. It was like a firing squad. And you have to wonder if this was a 18-year-old white female in a white community, did the police get out of their car just to unload their weapons on them? Mm-hmm. It's different. You know, the many places, many black communities are seen as bad communities. And so the people walking around the street in those black communities are potential criminals. That's what I mean.
I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I want to kind of jump back to an earlier conversation about the op-ed that you wrote a couple of weeks ago. Can you talk more about really just where we are as a nation to fixing this problem? Because you mentioned in your op-ed that even after George Floyd's death, right, even after the officers are charged, we will still have this issue, right? So where is fixing the issue going to take place? What needs to happen? I'm jumping ahead some, but I'll come back to another point earlier.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing in policing is the question is this. The question that people ask is, what works in policing? And I think that's the wrong question. I think the question should be, what makes neighborhoods safe? What makes communities safe? Mm. When you figure out what it is, and I do know what that is, what makes communities safe, then that's what the police should do. If you're going to reform policing, don't ask what works in policing, because the assumption is it's law enforcement. Ask what works to keep neighborhoods safe. And this is where my research is focused, and I've used, I've done a number of studies in urban communities and neighborhoods and in rural communities, and I continually find the same thing. Wherever I look, the safest places have an atmosphere in the community that's supportive. The places that are most dangerous are places that are in conflict with the police, where isolated people are isolated from each other. And the places that are dependent on the police to fix problems are also very unsafe, and people are fearful. So the best type of conditions are where people have bonds with each other and they watch out for each other. And the police could help with that, but they don't, because they have the notion that they need to protect the public.
Mm-hmm.
The police are the best protection. That begins the spiral downward.
There's an image you showed me earlier, and I want you to jump to this image really quickly. Speaking about making neighborhoods safe, Dr. Nolan, this the intersection image, Ivan, I have never seen this before, and I certainly haven't heard this explained the way that you explain it. But I think you make an interesting point when you talk about how to make communities more safe as opposed to policing or reforming the police structure. Talk a little bit about this image here, these three images that we have pulled up.
Okay. So this is the typical scenario. This is like an accident drawing. I call it the allegory of the dangerous intersection. And it's an allegory. So it's the intersection of right and wrong streets. So you're a new officer in a law enforcement organization, and you go to the corner of right and wrong streets and you see this accident. And you look at it and you say, both of these vehicles have a green light. So who gets a ticket? So the officer, an unbiased officer, well, clearly it's B. They cut in front of A. And so they give out the ticket, and because they're in a law enforcement organization and there's a database to search, they find out that there's lots of accidents at this intersection. So they begin to set up on the intersection with the intent of reducing accidents and enforce the law. And what they find that 2 or 3 times a day, they can stop a car, give out a ticket, and sometimes they smell a little marijuana, sometimes they arrest on a warrant. So they're getting the tickets, but they're also benefiting because they can make an arrest, search the car, and that sort of thing. And again, the intent is to reduce accidents through law enforcement. So let me take to the next slide. So the next slide, some years ago, there was a version of this called problem-oriented policing. And it was asking the police to take a look at the bigger picture and see, could you actually fix this without doing law enforcement? Well,
All right, so let me pause you there for a second. That goes back to your original point, Dr. Nolan, right? It is not trying to redo law enforcement. It's making communities more safe, correct?
Right. In this particular one, so the officer might say, "Well, look, if I change the directions of the street, or I put an arrow in for the light of B, stagger the lights, I could stop the accidents." But why do that? Because it's so lucrative in terms of I can stop people and search incident for arrest. I mean, there are a lot of dangerous intersections. There are a lot of dangerous problems that could be fixed another way. But for a law enforcement officer, why do that? Why would you do that? Because you have a reason to stop people and arrest, and then search incident to arrest. So this officer may say, well, I stopped B, give him a ticket. I found out that he was wanted on a warrant. I locked him up. A failure to pay a fine. He owed money. So this is a bad guy in this accident. So then I jump out, in the allegory, I basically say, well, now this officer takes some sociology courses, and to see things from a broader perspective, and he looks at social structure and culture, and so he pans out a little bit, and he looks at what you see here in front of you now is this intersection expanded, and you look and you see all B cars come out of poor neighborhood, A cars come out of wealthy neighborhood, and it's structured the way they meet each other. A is going straight, and they're always right. Whenever there's an accident, A is always right, and whenever there's an accident, B is always wrong. This is the structured nature of the problem. And
I see this a lot in DC. I live in DC, and so when I'm driving through Southeast, Ward 8, which is one of the toughest wards, as they say, in Washington, DC, coming out of a poor neighborhood, there's tons of cameras, right, speed traps, There's a lot of cars sitting in those areas. But as soon as I cross over into Northwest, I don't see a lot of speed cameras or traps or police officers. So it sounds as if, to your point, they're placing a lot of the emphasis in the poor neighborhoods. And so when they do get pulled over for an accident, they're able to check on these other things you've talked about.
Yeah, because they're more than likely, because they're poor, they can't pay their fines, and then they don't show up because they know that they may be incarcerated for failure to pay a fine. So you have some neighborhoods, and you're probably like this in DC, the ones you're familiar with, there may be like 80% of the households have somebody in it who's in it. And so when they need help settling disputes with the civil authorities, you can't call them. So there's a code of the street that develops. I don't trust those people, so I've got to settle it myself. Somebody stole something from me, I got to go get them. Mm-hmm. In the wealthy community, that kind of violence isn't happen, because if somebody steals something, I call the police and they help me get it back. In the poor neighborhood, you can't call the police because and then again, then that fuels the stereotype. Oh, they're violent, they're criminals. It's perpetuated, and it's perpetuated by this this law enforcement approach. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm itching to ask this next question. I mean, it's all looks like, based upon this allegory you have here, it's a setup, it's a trap, right? And so how does the Black community protect itself against these types of indoctrinations and these types of traps that have been set up?
Well, basically what it is, I mean, nobody would say that I'm intentionally setting a trap, although this is, it's justified as people coming out of poor neighborhood are criminals. They said they're not really, but there's a, we should be able to stop them, and we need to enforce laws on them. But what I want to describe is a new policing, a new way of thinking about it is, if we were to say, if the goal of policing is to actually make places safer, and what it means to make places safer is to build relationships, you would take that traffic intersection and say, hey, look, we have a problem here. Let's take some people from poor neighborhood and wealthy neighborhood and service industry and finance industry. Let's bring them together to work together on this problem, fix it together, and the next problem we have together, we'll bring them back together and bring them back together. And so the way you handle things, or you fix problems by bringing people together and building the types of relationships that actually make places safer. Instead of meeting at the intersection in a hit and run, poor neighborhood is meeting wealthy neighborhood with resources. There's resources in the service and the finance industry. They can help each other. They can build networks together. But the system isn't set up to facilitate that. The system is set up to actually keep them apart.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I want to take some questions from the audience tonight. I do have a couple more that I want to ask Dr. Nolan, but you guys have been quiet, but I think only quiet because you've been sitting on your hands wanting to make a comment. We're getting some information tonight from Dr. Nolan. If you do have a question, please drop it in the chat. I do want to at least acknowledge the question, or if you want to ask it yourself, feel free to select the number 9 in the chat, and then I'll make sure I take the mic off of you so that you can ask a question. But Dr. Nolan, your research is very fascinating, very interesting. Can you tell us just a little bit more on maybe what new things you're working on as of now related to your research?
Well, most of it right now is related to what I call neighborhood dynamics. And this is, so many times the crime or drug addiction or anything, any social problem is blamed on the individual. In other words, in West Virginia, recently there was a report that came out that said that the problem in West Virginia with drugs is substance abuse disorder. And you see, substance abuse disorder is in the person. So it originates in the person. The way we think about it is the problem. So what I say is this, that it's not the problem, it's the context that creates the problem. This is why we have high rates of crime or high rates of drugs in particular areas, because there's a context that produces it. And so that's what I've been studying, the context. And the neighborhood that I had a video, or not a video, but a slide where I had, is it easy to go back to that, or should I just describe it? The plan,
yeah, go ahead and pull that up, Ivan, the plant image that you
planner.
this earlier, yeah.
So there's an assumption that, you know, the way I think about it, and I've heard this before, if a plant doesn't grow, you don't blame the plant. You look at the soil. You look at the environment that it's in, and so here is a depiction of that. And what I mean by the soil, I mean the neighborhood dynamics is this: in each of these flower pots, there are three levels of. There's one level of interdependence. There's a level of frustration and conflict, and there's a level of dependence on the police. And so, in my research, I found that the places that have the most conflict, the most frustration, the most conflict with the police are the ones where crime is very likely. And the safest places are the places where there's high levels of interdependence. This is all the way to the right. Low levels of conflict and low levels of dependence. And then in between high levels of dependence, this is where the community wants the police to protect them. They don't know their neighbors very well. They're a little safer, but not as safe as the places that are interdependent. So when I envision a new policing, a reformed policing, and again, defunding is sort of taking this to a new level. What I've been talking about is police reform, that the outcome of policing should be to build interdependent, strong interdependent places. Everything should be geared toward that, not the number of arrests, not the number of people sent to prison. It should be what are we doing together? What types of relationships are we building to make a place a thriving place?
Okay, a couple of questions for Dr. Nolan from the chat. The first is, if we wanted to apply these ideas in our local communities, are there any how-to type or practical advice? Are there any models of successful implementations of this sort of system that we could point to? Question two.
Yeah, this is a good question. You sort of have to piece together. I mean, I can help. So consider me a resource. So I'm going to give you a cheap answer, but you can follow up with me on this. There is we have an article out from a couple of years ago called situational policing, and this was an idea where you looked at these neighborhood dynamics on a vertical dimension and low and high crime on a horizontal axis. Anyway, there's 4 different neighborhood types. And you can use this model to create dialogue in a community with the police so that everyone sees progress along the way. It's like a mental map for progress. And then there are strategies within each neighborhood type that communities can work with the police in order to get to the desired end, this strong interdependent neighborhood. I have a book that's going to the printer July 1st, Palgrave Macmillan printers or publishers, that has 2 chapters. One is a how-to do this. It probably will be out at the end of the year with how to what metrics to use to measure success in this model, and some of the strategies for actually doing policing this way. So,
Dr. Nolan, how do we get a hold of even that particular chapter? I know that that book is going to be very hefty when it comes to price, and we're talking tonight just with our audience about providing them with opportunities to gain some of this rich resources without having to pay high-end dollar.
Yeah, well, I'll make sure you get the resources. I can give summary sheets, and I can give type of information that can help your viewers actually do this. This is what I want to happen, because again, I say that I've been to the police, I've talked to the police about this, and they ignore it, and they deny that this is useful because they're law enforcers. And so I believe that it's going to take a mandate from the community to actually do something like this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you are interested in getting some more information related to this how-to, please put your email address in the chat. If you are new tonight, please put your email address in the chat. Dr. Nolan is talking with us tonight on police reform, having served as a former police officer, now professor, who has books and articles out, and he speaks a lot about this topic. But on Thursday, we do have law enforcement kind of coming back. This will be law enforcement part 2 to really discuss what takes place inside of the precinct. Dr. Nolan talked tonight about this indoctrination into understanding that this is a war and police officers are going out to war every day they put that uniform on. And so on Thursday, we'll get a chance to ask some questions with police officers on how they have been indoctrinated. So shoot your email address in the chat. I do want to make sure that we put you on the list so that we provide you with this information tonight. Again, if you're a guest tonight, this is your first time, throw your information in the chat. We're here every Tuesday and every Thursday evening, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Another question that I'm going to throw out to you, Dr. Nolan, that came in the chat. And I think you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. This may be a question of someone kind of joining a little late. Why is deadly force used instead of force to stop? Why is deadly force used? I think there was a recent clip of an African-American male who grabbed a taser from a police officer. You may have seen the clip. And the police officer ended up shooting him in the back. What point did the police officer think that he was in harm's way? Why did he choose to use deadly force when he didn't have to?
Well, first of all, it's hard to put myself in the eyes or into the body of the officer. So if the officer says he was fearful for his life, I sort of accept. But I also know that the way the police think about it is what's morally right is what the policy says. What can I do? What am I allowed to do? It's a form of ethics that is based on it's like the Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments says thou shalt not steal. It doesn't say thou shalt not steal unless you're hungry. That's one form of ethics. Another form of ethics, which I advance in this new policing model, is a consequentialist ethics. In other words, it's right if in terms of its consequences. If action by the police divides communities, if it harms someone else, if it kills someone, the consequences of the action are what's important, not whether or not they follow the rules or not. I think that all of these things, if you evaluated Ferguson, there were ways that the officer, if he didn't feel like I've got to go chase this person at this particular time, I'm going to wait for a backup, it may have ended a different way. But the mentality of the officers is, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm following the rules, and therefore somebody ends up dead. And I'm right. I went home safe, and therefore it's justified. And that sort of thinking is just so divisive and harmful.
There's a question in the chat, Dr. Nolan. You did serve as a former cop at one time, and you did discuss how you weren't in the mind of this cop recently who shot this black male. But were you ever instructed as a former cop to attempt to de-escalate an issue? So walk us through that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's a series of force that you're supposed to use. You don't go right to deadly force, and so officers should do that. I mean, again, the officer who shot in the case in Atlanta may say, I haven't heard, may say, I thought it was a gun. I thought what I saw was a gun. I mean, we saw the video, it wasn't. So the officer, I don't know what the officer is going to say, but
sure.
I do know that there's a case that happened in West Virginia where an officer went up to a car to make an arrest for a nonviolent offense, and the guy was afraid and took off, and the officer saw it as a threat. The car was coming at me, and he shot and killed the driver. And so, in other words, because of the mindset, I'm at war, I don't have to back down, I'm not getting out of the way, I'm going to shoot. Mm-hmm. And it's justified. It's justified in the court system. It's justified by the Attorney General's office.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is have to happen. And I say morally, it's wrong, but these things are justified today.
Yeah, so walk us through really quickly again, and I know you did this earlier, because you're right, it is justified. You have a shooting, there's a killing, and then they get off. Another shooting, another killing, and then they get off, right? All of this justification. At what point, though, is the redesign, right, going to fix all of the justification?
Well, I think this is what happens. I mean, this is honestly, because this happened to me. I left the drug unit. I'm 7 years, I'm in a drug unit, jumping out, chasing people, doing wiretap cases, locking people up. I was in the mindset. While I was at Temple, I'm learning about context and about community and that sort of thing. And then I started doing community policing. And I was in the neighborhoods that I used to think were bad neighborhoods. And I was talking face to face with people about the concerns they have over safety. And it was that interaction. There's connections that I had. There's real connections, like us talking together, that made me see the people as human beings and not necessarily good people and bad people. And again, it didn't register at first, but over time it did, and with my continuing education. And I feel like what I tell you in the allegory is if you deal with social problems in a way that bring people together across races and genders and different groupings, and they work together on
I couldn't hear what you said.
No, you're fine.
You work together on these problems, they see each other in a different light. They're not separate. It's not the other. You know, it's part of me now. I see this. And again, it may seem a little cheesy, but I believe in it. I mean, I've seen how this can work. As long as we stay divided and one of us looks like the bad guy and the other guy looks like the other bad guy, there's not going to be any healing. There are systematic ways of dealing with crime and drug abuse and that sort of thing that brings people together.
Mm-hmm.
And one strategy is restorative justice. This is maybe for another topic, another show.
Yeah.
This has a lot of healing power.
I want to ask two more questions. One of them by my good friend and dear colleague, Dr. Amina Anderson, who's on the call tonight. I want to add to the question that she put in here. She says, why do they shoot more often when the offender is Black? And I want to add to that question before you answer it. I'm also curious from a sociological lens. Is it that white officers, in your own opinion, are just fearful of African Americans as to the reason why many officers are shooting so many Black people in today's day and time?
The police shoot about 1,000 people and kill 1,000 people per year in the United States. Shoot and kill. This is more people die because of in interaction with the police, but they shoot and kill. And the majority of them are not non-white, disproportionately non-white. Actually, the majority are white, but they're disproportionately non-white. There's some argue that there's a bias, implicit bias, that officers, Black officers and white officers actually shoot disproportionately African American men more often. But where I say it's the game, it's the mentality, the warrior mentality, because I see that it is Black and white and Hispanic officers all doing the same thing.
Mm. Mm.
So it's the game of policing. It creates a disposition in officers, whatever their race, to look for, be violent, to go to war with the bad guys, and they see people in these communities as bad people or potentially bad people.
That's interesting. And maybe you saw this in your study. Did you also say that Black officers kill Black people just as much as white officers do, percentage-wise?
I don't have the data on this, but I saw that at one point I saw that in the city of Chicago, for example, most African-American men were killed by African-American officers. And again, don't hold me to that one, but
Sure.
There was a study out of Harvard that said that in shootings, there wasn't a racial bias, although there appears to be, but if you look at the race of the shooter, it's as likely to be a black officer as it is a white officer.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at 3 of the officers in the van with Freddie Gray were African-American.
Mm-hmm.
3. So you have, the game of policing captures all races, but the harm is still disproportionately in the African-American community. You go to a prison, it's a sea of dark faces.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know?
That's what funds these prisons. The question I want to just take from the audience, this is a really good question, kind of goes back to, for those of us who understand the benefit of total police reform. There are those on the call who probably do have this notion, and maybe those who are on the fence. But those who do, radical changes like this will take a lot of time and effort. So Dr. Nolan, do you have any suggestions on small changes that can be made in the meantime?
Well, first of all, it's a big change in terms of a perspective, but it wouldn't be very hard to do. All you would have to do, this is the small version of it. If a police department said, I'm going to assign officers to community, and they're going to be evaluated by the strength of the relationships, the number of problems that they solve, the help that they give to communities, and I'm going to evaluate this. They're going to be considered successful officers and get promoted in ribbons by doing this sort of a thing, not by making arrest. These things would happen very quickly. And the exposure, these positive exposures between people in the community, building these types of relationships, I think would de-escalate violence in itself. I've experienced this myself. It can happen quickly. Now, but when we talk about systemic violence, prosecutors and the prisons and all of it, it's big. It's really big. I mean, you have to look at what the police are facing. If the prosecutors want to prosecute, the prisons want to correct. They want to fill prisons. The system all works together. The expectation is that the cops are going to be making lockups. The prosecutors can prosecute. If the prosecutors and the prisons and the police all tried to build strong, safe communities, and they were organized to work together to do that, it could happen like that.
Mm. But that's not their agenda.
They're not going to do it. That's why I wanted to come on your show. You have to make it a mandate from the people, because the people who are invested in the system as is won't do it.
And so the mandate is what, Dr. Nolan?
So the what?
So the mandate is what? What does the community, what does the village need?
Well, the community gives a mandate. Our elected officials, we want police reform that looks like this. We want prison reform. We want prosecutor reform. We want them working together to help us, not harm us. This is simple like that. Help us. You know, it's simple.
Yeah. Yeah, help us, not harm us. I like that, Dr. Nolan. Ivan, if you go ahead and pull up the last flyer. Those of us who are just joining us, wow, we have had an intense conversation with a researcher, phenomenal writer, professor, chair of sociology, Dr. Nolan at West Virginia University. Dr. Nolan, it's just been a pleasure just to have you on the call tonight. And even double pleasure to know that all of us were able to take a front row seat in your classroom, because this is exactly what you teach in your.
This is it.
Right, we do appreciate that. On Thursday, do have another special episode tonight. We talked a lot about police reform from the lens and desk of a researcher and professor and former police officer. On Thursday, we're going to talk to two current police officers, one deputy sheriff and one detective, on recruiting and selecting law enforcement officers, getting a sneak peek of what some of that training is like. We have been curious these last couple of weeks and trying to understand post George Floyd's death. What is the training like? What are people going through to put out so much force, an unnecessary force related to our communities?